Long have its vast mansions lain empty since the children of Durin left, but now we spoke of it again with longing, and yet with dread, for no dwarf has dared to pass the doors of Khazad-dum for many lives of kings, save Thror only, and he perished. At last, however, Balin listened to the whispers, and resolved to go. And though Dane did not give leave willingly, he took with him Ori and Oin, and many of our folk, and they went away south.
Hey everyone, Yoiston here, and I hope you all are doing well, wherever you are in Middle-earth. Today we will be looking at the character history of one of the most popular dwarves in Thorin's company, and one who underwent a dangerous but infamous mission in Moria thereafter, Balin, son of Fundin, called by some the Lord of Moria. Sources for today are in the description and cards. My friends, thank you all so much for joining me. Let's begin our tale. Balin was born in 2763 of the Third Age to the family of Fundin in Erebor. Our dwarf, whose name has an unknown meaning, was born before the Lonely Mountain was attacked, yet would not be too old when Smaug did sack the Dwarven Kingdom. Indeed, he was only 7 years old when Smaug sacked Erebor, and the Longbeards were forced into exile. While Peter Jackson's movies portray Balin as the oldest member of Thorin's company, or at least the one that looks to be the oldest, he was actually 17 years younger than Thorin Oakenshield. And so with his kin, Balin went into the wilds, probably following King Thror into Dunland. His younger brother, Dwalin, would be born a couple of years after the sacking of Erebor, and between them would be formed a strong bond of dwarven blood and dwarven hardship. For it is quite likely that, together, while they were both young in the minds of the dwarven folk, they would be nearly of fighting age when the War of the Dwarves and Orcs broke out in 2793 to avenge the late King Thror. While these two would surely not lead armies of their own, they could possibly have earned names for themselves in the war, even as Dane Ironfoot himself did, who was also close to them in age. At the beginning of this war, Balin and many other dwarves had assumed that, with the murder of King Thror, the dwarven ring of power given to the House of Durin in the Second Age was lost to the Orcs of Moria, just as the kingdom of Khazad-dum itself was as well. Yet this was not true, as Balin would eventually, painfully, come to discover. While the revenge for Thror was carried out successfully, Moria would not be reclaimed, not yet, and the dwarves would go back to their own homes in distant lands. Likely Balin went back to Dunland, and then on to the halls of Thrain and Thorn that were established in the Blue Mountains. Balin would grow older and wiser, coming into his own as a good friend of both Thrain and Thorn, just as his father Fundin must have been. Eventually Thrain would call upon some dwarves, including Balin, Dwalin, and others, to join him in an expedition to return to Erebor, for the Dwarf King longed for that place in his heart. Forcing Thorn, his heir, to remain behind, Thrain led this expedition in 2841, 100 years exactly, before Thorn's company took the same journey to the Lonely Mountain. Yet Thrain's expedition came to ruin under the trees of Mirkwood, when the necromancer sent forth beasts to split the party and capture Thrain. While Balin, Dwalin, and others survived, they did not know the fate of King Thrain, and so they returned to the Blue Mountains to tell Prince Thorin the news and establish him as the new king. He did not know it, and perhaps it would have saved him and so many others some heartache, or it could have caused more, if Balin had discovered that Thrain did in fact have the Dwarven Ring of Power, but now it was captured by the necromancer of Dol Guldur. Yet, it was not to be so, and Balin continued to believe that the ring might be found somewhere in Khazad-dum. Time continued forth, and eventually Thorin Oakenshield would wish to attempt the same venture to retake Erebor, but this time he had made plans with a wizard in Bree named Gandalf. Gandalf would speak of the need for a burglar to Thorin and his allies, including Balin, whose responses to such a claim further ensured Bilbo's being part of the mission. And so, loyal Balin, second oldest dwarf in Thorin's company, joined in this expedition, being the second to arrive at Bilbo's home of Bag End, telling him that more dwarves were coming. Balin was not yet 200 years old, but he had aged quickly, appearing old to Bilbo with a white beard and red hood. Like every dwarf in the company, Balin was surely skeptical of Bilbo, but would take more kindly to the Hobbit than would the others, and more quickly too, for he was amazed by Bilbo when the Hobbit snuck past his own watch, as Balin was a renowned watchman, yet would continue to admire the Hobbit more and more as the adventure went on, when Bilbo rescued them from the spiders, or when he saved them from the elves, something Balin's words as the second leader of the party could not, and so on and so forth. Balin marveled at him. The old dwarf would even go slightly into Erebor with Bilbo, going further in the passage than the others, and would help him back up the passage when he returned. Balin was certainly most concerned for Bilbo, not hesitating to go inside when he felt Bilbo needed help. Balin would go on to fight in and survive the Battle of Five Armies, seeing Erebor restored under the new rule of King Dain Ironfoot. A few years after the quest of Erebor, Balin would take the long journey back himself to the Shire to visit Bilbo with Gandalf and catch them up on the news from the mountain in 2949. Balin had grown wealthy, and his beard had grown even longer. Balin would become a great lord amongst the dwarves in the Lonely Mountain, having a place of high honor and respect, yet that did not grant him everything his heart desired. The years would pass, and Balin's mind would wander, back to the dwarven mansions, their homes of old, eventually thinking that the success of Erebor might be replicated in Moria, that the Ring of Durin could be reclaimed from the darkness. Balin began to make plans and gather his own company, that they might make a colony and retake Khazad-dum. King Dain, however, counseled Balin against this. Retaking Erebor was one thing, but facing all of the orcs and the terror of Durin's Bane, whom Dain had himself seen and foretold that some other power would have to pass through Khazad-dum before the dwarves might live there again, was too much for Balin to hope against. But regardless of the king's counsel, in 2989 Balin mounted this mission anyway, taking many dwarves with him, such as Oin and Ori from Thorin's company. They came through the east gate of Moria, where the Battle of Azan-nul-Bazar had been fought by even some of these dwarves themselves nearly 2 centuries earlier. After a small battle with orcs near the gate, they would manage to come into Khazad-dum, establishing themselves in Dwarrodelf, the 21st Hall, and in particular, the Chamber of Mazarbul, near the many-columned hall. They would have actually a bit of prolonged success, finding armories, mithril, the helm and axe of Durin himself, and so on, as they explored and recolonized Moria for 5 years. Balin would proclaim himself the Lord of Moria, and it seemed for a time that they would indeed have some measure of success, yet Balin could not find the Ring of Durin. Yet in late 2994, on November 10th, Balin would go back out the east gate to Lake Miromir. While going to this holy site, Balin would be shot by an orc archer. And with this archer came more orcs up the river Celebrant, and they would find their way into Moria. The dwarves of Balin's company would be pinned, Oin would be lost to the floods and the Watcher in the west, and Ori would be one of the last to fall, writing a record of these events in the Chamber of Mazarbul, the tomb of Balin, who had been laid to rest in Khazad-dum after his death near the Lake Miromir. Word stopped coming altogether from Moria, and for many years the Free Peoples wondered what became of Balin and his company, but they did guess their fate. This conversation would come up in Rivendell in 3018 of the Third Age, when the Fellowship of the Ring was forming. Yet Gandalf knew that the Ring of Durin had been retaken by Sauron in Dol Guldur. The Fellowship would journey through Moria, finding their way into the Chamber of Mazarbul and discovering the record of what occurred. This would eventually be brought back to Erebor by Gimli, and the tale of Balin would not be lost. Eventually, Moria would be retaken, but not in the way or time that Balin had hoped. And so we come to the end of our tale on the great hero, adventurer, and royal lord of Moria, Balin, son of Fundin. From the tale of Balin, we see that we must, at times, take our successes and victories for what they are, rather than always looking to the horizon for more. If Balin had accepted the victory of Erebor without also needing Moria, he might have lived an even longer and more happy life. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you all enjoyed today's tale. If you did, please be sure to hit that like button and share this with a friend. What are your thoughts on Balin, son of Fundin? Let me know in the comments below. I enjoy how we see this character's good, warm, wise, and loyal side, as well as some of his flaws and his ambition. If you'd like to get some awesome maps, shout out to my friend Rhinus Art, who still has a great deal going on for some of the best Middle-earth and Balerian maps I have ever seen and held in person. A link for those are in the description. Please use the code MOTW24 at checkout for 20% off through the month of February. If you'd like to support the channel, please consider getting some candles from our friends Mythologie Candles, or order some Weta or United Cutlery, Lord of the Rings swords, statues, and other replicas from Castle Kon, who does international shipping, and use the code WEST at checkout, and please check out our merch and Patreon. Thanks to our Valar tier patrons and YouTube members: Peter Shepard, Merton, John Hume, Elizabeth Calvert, Maz Gibbs, Reese Jenkins, Arthur Merlin, Dale Davis, Theodore, Moon Viper, Andrew Carlisle, Zoomi, and Brian Hunley. Thank you so much to all of our patrons and YouTube members. It really means a lot. Please subscribe and hit that bell button to join the Men of the West and all of the Free Peoples today. I'll see you all again next week with a video on the petty dwarves of Middle-earth, speaking more to this rather strange and enigmatic people. My friends, thank you all so much for joining me on this adventure. Until the next one.